I was 18 at the time, and it was the beginning of summer, so I was off from school and I didn't have any job. The majority of my time was spent inside the house playing video games, watching YouTube or TV, or just relaxing. When this happened, my parents were out of town for a few days, leaving me with the house. This was a common thing and was never a big deal. Sometimes I'd invite friends over or whatever, but this night I was just enjoying the time to myself. I was watching a rerun of one of my favorite shows on Netflix while also scrolling through my phone. It was late. I don't know the exact time, but I think maybe 11 or 12 when there was a knock at the front door. I paused the TV and went to see who it was. It almost didn't even register in my mind that it was so late, but thankfully it did before I carelessly would have opened the door. I looked in the peephole and saw two men both wearing similar clothes and just waiting for me to answer. I stood there and thought for a second whether or not to let them know I was home by asking what they wanted. I ended up staying quiet and just watching to wait for them to leave, but a few seconds later they called out, "Hello! We're here looking to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Ian." That was my parents they were referring to, though I changed the name for privacy. Confused, I still remained quiet, knowing it was far too late for any sort of visit, even if it was important. After a minute, the men looked at each other and said something quietly, then walked off the porch. The outdoor lights were off, so I couldn't see where they went, but I never saw any headlights or cars show up, which had me wondering if they'd walked here, which would only make things weirder. I went back to the TV but left it on pause for a while so I could hear if they came back. It only took a few minutes until I heard a pair of footsteps outside the house. They went up to the porch, but instead of knocking like they did before, they started making their way around to the side of the house. I got up and ran to the back window. As they got to the backyard, I saw them open the fence and enter, and I hid away from the window so I wouldn't be seen, but I could hear them go up to the back door. They started talking, then began messing with the door. I took this as my chance to get my phone and hide inside the garage. I called the police, explaining the possible break-in that was taking place. And after less than a minute, a loud pop sound vibrated through the house and the back door slid open. Their footsteps went through the house and straight to the stairs going up to the bedrooms. The door opened, they entered, then closed it behind them, but after that, there were no more sounds. I waited for a horrifying and slow 10 minutes in silence before the police pulled up to the house. When they did, there was a few quick footsteps upstairs, and the two men started arguing. A few officers came in through the back door and ran upstairs, while another came to the garage and helped me outside. The men didn't resist the arrest, but they also didn't speak a word on why they were there, despite weeks going by and it being somewhat obvious that they weren't simply robbing the house. The only thing they could charge them with was breaking and entering. It scares me, though, that they seem to be looking for my parents, and it almost felt like they were going to wait upstairs for them until they came back from their trip. I think back to whether or not I should have shown myself, and if that would have stopped the break-in, but something about their behavior tells me that they still would have broken in and would have done to me whatever was necessary. I live on the outskirts of a mid-sized town in Wyoming. The whole reason I live here is because owning a huge plot of land isn't as impossible of a task as it can be in most other states. My house is small, but it was cozy enough for living alone. This happened 4 years ago in 2019. It was spring, and we were going through a month of pouring rain almost every single day. It was a Sunday, and I was home from work, spending the day watching TV and resting. Sometime around 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, I got an unexpected knock at my door. I barely heard it through the rain, and when I entered the door, I was even more surprised to see it was some random guy. Not a mailman or anything of the sorts. Someone coming all the way out onto my property without notice was very unusual, being that it was far out of the way. "How can I help you?" I said. The guy, looking some in his late 20s, said he'd been camping out in the woods nearby and had gotten into some trouble and needed a place to stay for the night. With the location of my house, if he wasn't lying, then showing up at my doorstep would make sense, because that was the closest place within the woods by at least 5 or 6 miles. It was also pouring out, which made me feel even worse for him, but it still didn't take away from the possible danger of letting a stranger into my home. I offered him a phone call to get a ride into town, but the guy denied my offer. After bluntly saying he couldn't stay here, the guy walked off. I watched him go down the dirt road a little ways, then he veered off and walked into the woods. As odd as that was, I didn't have it on my mind for more than a few minutes before I was back to watching TV. I didn't check the time very often, but it had to be at least 2 hours later and well into the night when I saw an orange glare coming from the window by my backyard. I got up and moved the curtain. Through the rain and fog, I saw a campfire right in the middle of the woods outside my house. It was small, flickering under a large tree as the rain poured down on it. Standing next to it, there was the outline of a figure holding something. I couldn't tell, though, if he was facing my house or into the woods. After a moment, I closed the curtains and picked up my phone, calling the police to let them know about this person outside my house. I knew it would take probably an hour for them to get here, and whoever was out there wasn't doing me any harm. But at the very least, I wanted them away from my house before I went to bed. Once I got off the phone with the officer, I checked the window again. The fire was still burning lightly, but the figure wasn't there. Then I heard footsteps coming toward the house. I ran to the other window and caught sight of him walking past with a hunting rifle in his hand before he turned the corner and went to the front door. He banged on it a few times, then it went quiet. I grabbed my self-defense handgun from the hallway closet and hid around the wall. Still trying to process the situation I was in, he hit the door again. This time, I could tell it was with the stock of his rifle, nearly breaking a panel out of the door. In this moment, I could only think that I had to try to deter him immediately, before it becomes life or death for one of us. I shot around toward the edge of the door frame, deafening myself for a second as the shot rang through the house. When my hearing came back, all I heard was the rain pouring down. No footsteps, banging or yelling. I gathered up courage after 5 minutes of no sounds and looked out the peephole. Seeing an empty porch and outside in the yard were clear footprints going away from the house. He must have run right after the shot during the couple seconds I couldn't hear. Police did a thorough search and found some strange details out by where the campfire was. They found the duffel bag with evidence of it having been buried nearby and likely dug up just hours before the attack. What they told me is that it was most likely a burglary kit, or possibly even a murder kit, that was planted in advance with the intent to be dug up and used later on. This means whoever attacked me had planned it and had been right outside my house at least once before that night. Why he attacked me specifically is not known, and who and where he is currently is still no closer to being figured out than it was 4 years ago. I still live in the same house and worry every day that he might come back. When I was growing up, I lived with my mom in a small house during my middle school and high school years she took up. It was just after 2 in the morning when the sound first pulled me from sleep. A soft, almost imperceptible scrape from downstairs. I lay there, heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs, listening. My wife, Sarah, was a deep sleeper, her breathing even and soft beside me. The house was old, full of groans and creaks, and I tried to convince myself it was just settling. But this sound, this was different. It had a deliberate quality, a stealthiness that made the hair on my arms stand up. I slid out of bed, my feet meeting the cold hardwood floor with a silent press. The moonlight cut a silver swath across the bedroom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. I crept to the door, my hand hovering over the cool brass knob. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to lock it, to barricade us in, to call the police. But another, more primal instinct took over. The need to know. The need to protect. My old baseball bat was propped in the corner of the closet, a relic from my high school days. I grabbed it, the worn leather grip feeling solid and reassuring in my hand. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob with excruciating slowness, wincing at the faint click of the latch. The hallway was a river of shadows, the only light coming from the faint glow of the nightlight in the upstairs bathroom. I moved down the hallway, placing each foot with the care of a bomb disposal expert. The stairs creaked under my weight, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I waited, listening, but the house remained silent. The scraping sound hadn't returned. Maybe it was an animal? A raccoon trying to get into the trash outside. I clung to that thought, a flimsy shield against a growing dread. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I could see the faint outline of the living room. Everything seemed normal at first glance. The couch, the coffee table, the bookshelf against the far wall. Ten primera, sa W italiano. The window next to the fireplace was slightly ajar, a dark rectangle against the lighter gray of the wall. A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I never left that window open. My heart was hammering now, a frantic drumbeat in the cavern of my chest. Someone was in my house. The thought was so violating, so fundamentally wrong, that my mind struggled to accept it. This was my sanctuary, our home, the place where my daughter took her first steps, where Sarah and I had built our life. I gripped the bat tighter, my knuckles white. I scanned the darkness, my eyes straining to pierce the shadows. I could hear a new sound now, a faint, rhythmic rustling coming from the direction of the kitchen. I moved towards it, my bare feet making no sound on the cool tile. The kitchen was even darker, the only light a sliver from the microwave clock. The rustling was louder here. It sounded like someone was going through the drawers. The silverware drawer. My mind flashed with images of knives, of violence. The fear was a physical thing now. A cold, heavy weight pressing down on me. I flattened myself against the wall next to the kitchen doorway. The cool plaster, a stark contrast to my heated skin. I took a steadying breath, trying to quiet the frantic symphony in my ears. I had the element of surprise. That was my only advantage. I peered around the edge of the doorway. A figure was silhouetted against the faint light from the window over the sink. A man, dressed in dark clothing, a beanie pulled low over his head. He was hunched over the counter. Back to me. He was methodically, quietly, placing items from our counter into a backpack on the floor. My laptop. Sarah's tablet. A surge of pure, unadulterated rage washed over me, eclipsing the fear. It was a white-hot fury that burned through my veins. How dare he invade our home, touch our things, threaten our safety? He straightened up and turned, and for a heart-stopping second, our eyes met across the dark room. He wasn't much older than me, his face gaunt and pale in the dim light. But his eyes, they were wide with a desperate, cornered look. It wasn't the look of a hardened criminal. It was the look of a scared kid. He took a step back, his hands coming up in a defensive gesture. He hadn't seen the bat. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't want any trouble." His words hung in the air between us. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times in the few minutes since I'd woken up. I'd imagined a fight, a struggle, a triumphant victory where I defended my home. I hadn't imagined this. I hadn't imagined the quiet desperation in his voice, the raw fear in his eyes that mirrored my own. "Get out," I said, my voice low and gravelly. Barely a whisper. I raised the bat slightly, so he could see it. "Get out of my house." Now, he stared at the bat, then back at me. He seemed to shrink, to deflate. He slowly zipped his backpack, leaving my laptop and Sarah's tablet on the counter. He took another step back towards the open window. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the floor. I have nothing." He turned and scrambled back through the window he'd entered. I watched him go, a dark shape melting into the deeper shadows of the backyard. I stood there for a long time, the baseball bat heavy in my hands, listening to the sound of his retreating footsteps fading into the night. I didn't call the police. I walked over and shut the window, locking it securely. I checked every other window, every door, making sure we were sealed in tight. Then I went back upstairs. Sarah stirred as I slid back into bed. "Everything okay?" she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. I lay there, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving me feeling hollowed out and shaky. I thought about the man, about the fear in his eyes, about his whispered apology. The world suddenly felt more complicated, the lines between right and wrong more blurred than they had been just an hour before. "Yeah," I said, pulling the covers up to my chin. "Everything's okay." It was just the house settling. I knew I would be up for the rest of the night, my mind replaying every second, the fear, the anger, and the strange, unsettling pity. I had protected my home, but the encounter left me with a profound sense of unease. It wasn't a victory. It was just a quiet, lonely moment in the dark, a collision of two lives in a way neither of us could have ever expected. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was a night I would never, ever forget. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe for more. My girlfriend Chloe and I were desperate for a getaway, a real escape from the city grind, you know? After hours of scrolling, we found it. A secluded cabin, nestled deep in the woods, hours from anywhere. The listing photos were gorgeous. Rustic chic interior, a huge stone fireplace, and a wraparound porch with a view of nothing but trees. The price was almost too good to be true. It was Kadid, the Whispering Pines retreat. A bit cliché, but we booked it without a second thought. The drive was long, the GPS cutting out about 30 minutes from our destination. We had to rely on the host's handwritten directions, which were surprisingly accurate. We pulled up a long, gravel driveway just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The cabin was even more beautiful in person. It was perfect. We unlocked the door with a code and stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of pine and old wood. A welcome basket sat on the kitchen counter with a bottle of wine and a note. Enjoy your stay. Make yourselves at home. The host, there was no name. A little impersonal, but hey, we were here for privacy, right? We spent the first evening just relaxing. We lit a fire, opened the wine, and talked for hours. It was exactly what we needed. As the night deepened, the silence of the woods became loud. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside seemed amplified. Chloe, who's usually the brave one, kept glancing at the large, curtainless windows that faced the dark forest. "It feels like we're in a fishbowl," she murmured. I laughed it off and pulled her closer. The first strange thing happened that night. I woke up around 3 a.m., completely parched. As I walked to the kitchen, I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. I distinctly remembered locking it and engaging the deadbolt before we went to bed. I must have been more tired than I thought. I locked it again, double-checking the deadbolt this time, and went back to sleep. The next day, we decided to go for a hike. The host had left a map of local trails. We picked one that promised a scenic overlook. The woods were beautiful, but there was an unnerving stillness to them. No birds chirping, no squirrels chattering, just the crunch of our boots on the fallen leaves. After about an hour, we stumbled upon something not on the map. A small, dilapidated shed, nearly swallowed by overgrown vines. Curiosity got the better of me. The door was unlocked. Inside, it was dark and musty. The only light came from a grimy window. The shed was filled with old tools, rusted and forgotten, but in the back corner, there was a wooden chest. It wasn't locked. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, piled on top of each other, were dozens of guest books. Not for the cabin, but for this shed. I picked one up. The cover was worn leather. The first entry was dated decades ago. I started reading. He watches from the trees. The next entry, from a different year, different handwriting. Don't look in the windows at night. Another. We hear whispers from the walls. Chloe grabbed my arm. Leo, let's go. This is creepy. She was right. We closed the chest and practically ran back to the cabin. That night, the unease was suffocating. We tried to watch a movie, but every sound from outside had us jumping. Around midnight, Chloe was asleep on the couch, and I was staring into the fire when I heard it. A faint tapping. Tap. 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 It was coming from the back of the house, from the bedroom window. My blood ran cold. I thought about the guest book. Don't look in the windows at night. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was a branch, but the tapping became more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap. It was rhythmic. Deliberate. I had to look. I crept to the bedroom, my heart hammering against my ribs. I peeked through a crack in the blinds. There was nothing there. Whoosed the dark, impenetrable wall of trees. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Tem primera, sa W italiano. A single, fresh handprint pressed against the outside of the glass, right where the tapping had been. I didn't scream. I just backed away slowly, my mind racing. Who was out there? The host. Some local weirdo. We were miles from the nearest neighbor. I woke Chloe up. We're leaving, I whispered, my voice trembling. Now. She saw the look on my face and didn't ask any questions. We threw our stuff into our bags, not caring about folding anything. We just had to get out. As we scrambled to get our things, we heard a new sound. A soft, scraping noise. It was coming from downstairs, near the front door. It sounded like fingernails dragging slowly across the wood. We froze, listening. Scrap. then silence, then again. Scrap. The back door, Chloe mouthed, her eyes wide with terror. We tiptoed through the kitchen towards the back of the cabin. My hand was on the doorknob when we heard a voice. It was a low, raspy whisper, and it came from right outside the front door. Leaving so soon. That was it. I threw the back door open and we bolted. We didn't look back. We sprinted through the dark woods towards the car, branches scratching at our faces. The whispering seemed to follow us, echoing through the trees from every direction. You can't leave. You're our guests. We jumped into the car, and I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, spinning gravel everywhere, and sped down the long driveway. In the rearview mirror, my headlights cut through the darkness and illuminated the cabin. For a split second, I saw a figure standing on the porch, tall and unnaturally thin, just a silhouette against the warm light of the cabin. It raised a hand, as if to wave goodbye. We drove for hours, not stopping until the sun came up, and we were back in the familiar chaos of the city. We never contacted the host. We never left a review. What could we say? We just deleted the app from our phones. A few weeks later, though, a package arrived at our apartment. A small cardboard box with no return address. Inside was a single, worn leather guest book. Our names and the dates of our stay were neatly written on the first page. Underneath them, in the same handwriting, was a simple message. We're so glad you enjoyed your stay. Please come back soon. The woods miss you. For the last few years, I've been working 2 jobs. This means I usually leave my house around 6 in the morning and don't get home until 10 at night. Then I sleep. And on most days, I repeat that exact same schedule. Unfortunately, that's just the situation I've been in for a while. This happened just a couple of months ago. I came home one night and did my usual routine, shower and get ready for bed. But while I was in the shower, I heard some movement. It sounded like it was just outside the bathroom door. I quickly got out and checked, but I saw nothing. I figured it just had to be the house creaking or something. I finished cleaning up and got into bed. All throughout that night, I kept hearing these odd noises coming from all over the house. It was mostly a sort of creaking, kind of like if it were really windy outside and making the house sway. But there was no wind, and no reason for the house to be making any noise. At one point in the middle of the night, I even got up and walked around to try and find out what it was, but I found nothing. The next morning, I was exhausted and had to work the whole day, relying on coffee just to stay awake. By the time I got home, I was incredibly tired, really hoping for a good night's sleep. I went right upstairs and turned the shower on. But before I got in, I heard something again. This time, it was a clear footstep coming from downstairs. I grabbed a pair of scissors from my desk and slowly crept down the stairs. I was expecting to see an intruder, someone who had broken in while I was gone. But instead, the house looked exactly as I had left it. I checked every room, every closet, even under the beds. Nothing. At this point, I was genuinely scared. I wasn't just hearing things anymore. I called the police, and when they arrived, they did a full sweep of the house. Just like me, they found nothing. No signs of a break-in, nobody hiding anywhere. They suggested I might be overtired and hearing things, which I admit was possible. They left, and I was left alone in my house, feeling more confused and frightened than ever. I decided to install some security cameras the next day. I needed proof, either that I was going crazy or that something was seriously wrong. I set up a few cameras covering the main areas: the living room, the kitchen, and the upstairs hallway. The next night, the noises started again. The same creaking, the same faint thumps. But this time I had the cameras. The next morning, before work, I checked the footage. My heart sank. The living room camera showed a man. He was just standing there, in the middle of my living room, at 3 in the morning. He wasn't doing anything, just standing and staring. Then, he slowly walked into the kitchen, out of frame. The upstairs camera showed him walking down the hallway, stopping right in front of my bedroom door. He stood there for what felt like an eternity before turning around and going back downstairs. I watched as he just wandered around my house all night. When it got close to morning, he went to a small pantry in the kitchen, opened a hidden panel in the back wall that I never knew existed, and disappeared inside. The police came back, and this time they found him. He had been living in a tiny crawl space behind my pantry for weeks, maybe even months. He would come out at night when he thought I was asleep to get food and water. The creaking I heard was him moving around in the walls. I moved out that same week. The thought of him being there, just feet away from me while I slept, still gives me chills. Here's another story that's just as unsettling. I was 22 at the time, living in a very small one-bedroom house in the cheapest area of my city. After work on a Friday night, I hopped online to game with a bunch of my friends. It was a perfect night for staying up late, with a heavy downpour outside and no work or school the next day. We played for probably 2 hours before a sudden sound made me put everything on pause. It was a thump, and it sounded like it came from upstairs. My initial concern was a possible leak in the roof, caused by the heavy rain, so I went up to look. The only rooms upstairs were the single bedroom and a half bath, and neither of them had any signs of leaks, so I ran back downstairs and got back online with my friends. I was on for a while longer, only getting off at 2 a.m. because everyone else went to bed. I shut everything off and sat on the couch with some snacks, watching videos on my phone. About 10 minutes in, I heard another thump. It was from upstairs again, but it was so muffled it almost sounded like it was on the roof. I did an even more thorough search of both my bedroom and the bathroom up there, but there was nothing that could have caused the sound. I was sure it wasn't thunder either because it vibrated through the walls, like something literally hitting the house. After 10 minutes of looking around, I was so determined to figure it out that I put on my shoes and went out into the rain to see if there was something more noticeable from outside. At first, I saw nothing significant, but then I noticed a tree branch getting pretty close to the side of my house. It was a large, sturdy branch, but it was a good 3 or 4 feet away from the siding. Even in the rain, it wasn't really swaying that much. It seemed unlikely that it could reach the side of the house and bang against it. As I looked at it though, I realized there was a small window on the house that the tree kind of covered up. It was higher than my bedroom window, which meant it had to be for an attic. I had no idea there was an attic in this house. The hatch was definitely nowhere noticeable, and the roof wasn't a steep slope, so it didn't look like there would even be room for one. This hidden window was the first I'd ever seen to indicate an attic existed. I went back inside, even more curious than before, and started searching for this hatch that had to be somewhere. It took a minute, but I found it inside my bedroom closet. It was small and perfectly smooth with the ceiling, basically blending in aside from the tiny gaps where it opens. I stood up on a box and pulled it down, releasing a rusty ladder from the opening. Immediately, I was hit with a rotten smell, followed by another thump sound from below. I could tell the attic was extremely short, maybe only 2 feet tall at most. I heard them shuffling around as I grabbed my phone and left the house, calling 911 from my driveway. The cops got there and detained the man. He was a homeless person, apparently. He had climbed the tree up to the window and made his way in, staying up there for at least a week without me ever noticing. The absurdity of it all was almost unbelievable. I moved out very soon after that. In every house since, I've always checked the attics, but the one thing that has stayed with me is the image of that man at the end of the attic, on his hands and knees, staring at me with eyes that looked like both fear and anger. This last story is just as terrifying, and it happened in a rental. I was staying in an Airbnb for a week while on a work trip. On the 3rd night, I was watching TV on the couch in the living room. It was getting late, around midnight, and I was about to head to bed. Suddenly, I heard the front door handle jiggle. I froze. I knew I had locked it. I muted the TV and just listened. I heard a key slide into the lock, and the door slowly opened. I didn't wait to see who it was. I bolted from the couch and ran down the hallway toward the bedroom I was staying in. I swung around the corner and only caught a glimpse of a large man as he slammed the bedroom door shut. Then, I heard his footsteps, departing, going back toward the living room. I stood in place and just listened. He went all around the living room and kitchen, staying inside the house for probably 2 minutes before I heard the front door open and close behind him. The police came quickly after I called. And each time the homeowner came by as well. The living room and kitchen looked like they'd been ransacked. The furniture was scattered all over, and the cabinets were all open, with their contents tossed onto the floor. After a closer look, though, the owner didn't see anything that was missing. It looked more like whoever that man was, he was looking for something very specific, and nothing more. I left the rental and got a hotel after that, and I was never updated again about anything. I assume he was never found, but the situation has left me with a lot of questions. It's a chilling thought that I try not to dwell on. Thanks for watching. If you have a story you'd like to share, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Stay safe out there. I had barely gotten in when I heard it again. A sound from just outside the bathroom door. This time, I was certain it was right there, and it sounded like it passed by and left the bedroom. As crazy as it sounded, it really felt like something had moved across my room. I knew I had to check, to see if someone was there, but a deep sense of unease washed over me. When I finally mustered the courage to look, I didn't see anything. I did a quick walkthrough of the whole house, peeking into each room, but I was convinced it had to be something strange happening inside the walls or under the floorboards. I took my shower, got into bed, and fell asleep just before midnight. The instant I woke up, I knew something was wrong. It was pitch black, deep in the middle of the night, and the entire house was dead silent. I wasn't sure what had woken me, but I had a gut feeling it was connected to the sounds I'd been hearing. I glanced over my bedroom door and saw the faintest movement of a shadow from under the crack. I jolted upright, staring across the room. My heart immediately started pounding in my chest as I saw the shadow move away from the door and heard footsteps beginning to walk down the upstairs hallway. I was horrified, completely frozen in fear. It must have been a surge of adrenaline that finally got me out of bed and made me swing open the door. I looked out, and there, standing at the end of the hallway, was the dark outline of a man. His eyes were the only feature that truly stood out. They pierced right through me with a chilling sense of anger and restlessness. I slammed my bedroom door shut and locked it. I heard the man's footsteps immediately go down the stairs, but it took another 30 seconds before I heard him finally leave the house. I called the police as fast as I could, but they didn't have much luck. They found a few signs indicating the man had been in my house for at least a few days, but that was about it. I don't know where he was hiding, but my mind always goes back to when I'd hear him walk past the bathroom door. Maybe he was sleeping in my bed, then would quickly hide in the closet until I got in the shower, using that moment to slip out of the room. I also wonder why he spent that extra time downstairs before leaving, even when he knew I had seen him and had probably called the police. It's all just speculation now, but knowing that some random man was hiding in my house while I was sleeping is a horrifying thought that still haunts me. As far as I know, the man never came back, and there'd be no updates on his identity. Last year, I moved into a new house, far away from the city. My new job was remote, so I had no reason to stay in a crowded and expensive place anymore. For the first couple of months, I was loving everything about my new life, especially being so far from other people. But on a regular weekday afternoon, I got a knock at my door. This was actually the first time anyone had ever come to my door since I moved in, so it caught me a little off guard. I went up and opened it to a tall, middle-aged man. "How can I help you?" I asked, smiling to be friendly, thinking he was probably just a neighbor. Here are two stories from my personal experience that still send a chill down my spine. The first one happened on a completely normal Tuesday afternoon. Primera tomé, just going about my day, when the doorbell rang. I went to answer it, expecting a package, or maybe a neighbor. But standing on my porch was a man I'd never seen before. He was just standing there, looking at me. Before I could even ask what he wanted, he did something incredibly strange. He leaned to his side and peered past me, deep into my house. It was a deliberate, searching look, as if he was checking to see if anyone else was home. A wave of unease washed over me. Instinctively, I pulled the door in slightly, using my body to block his view. As soon as I did that, without a single word, the man turned and walked away. I didn't move. I just stood there, watching him walk all the way down my driveway and get into a car parked on the street. He drove off, and that was it. It was, without a doubt, the weirdest encounter I'd ever had. I had no idea what to make of it. That evening, I decided to stay home for dinner, just in case he came back. The thought of calling the police crossed my mind, but what would I even say? A man looked into my house and then left. I felt like they'd think I was wasting their time. Around 9 p.m., I put the TV on, hoping to relax a bit before heading to bed. But as I was sitting on the couch, I heard voices outside. I immediately muted the TV and listened intently. The sound was muffled, but I could definitely make out at least two people talking somewhere in my backyard. My heart started to pound. I crept over to the back window and carefully peeked through the blinds. In the dim light, I could see two figures moving across my yard. One of them was carrying a long object, maybe a tool of some kind, but it was too dark to see clearly. They walked between the trees, heading towards the side of my house. I hurried to the side window, trying to follow them, but they vanished from sight. And then, the talking stopped. Complete silence. I scanned every window, but there was no sign of them. Nothing. Suddenly, a loud, sharp knock on my front door shattered the silence and sent a jolt of pure fear through me. I moved as quietly as I could to the door and looked through the peephole. A man in dark clothes was standing there, his face obscured by a hat. It had to be one of the men from the backyard, but where was the other one? "What do you want?" I yelled through the door, my voice trembling. I figured they already knew I was home, so maybe a direct confrontation would scare them off. The man didn't answer. He just stood there, glanced to the side of my house, and then looked back at the door. His silence was terrifying my mind. I backed away from the door, grabbing my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, a loud smashing sound echoed from the back of the house. It was followed by another and another. I peered down the hall and saw a man, a different man, relentlessly hitting my back door with a shovel. Our eyes met for a split second. He saw me. He froze, then turned and ran. I was paralyzed with fear. Should I call the police or hide? The obvious answer was both, but my thoughts were scrambled. Then, another crash. This time, it was the side window. That's what finally broke my paralysis. I dialed 9011 as the man kept hitting the window, over and over. Just as the operator answered, everything went dead quiet. The banging stopped. The silence was almost as unnerving as the noise. It stayed that way until the police arrived. As their car pulled into my driveway, there was a sudden commotion outside. It was the man from the front door. He hadn't left. And as the police got him in the light, I realized it was the same man who had come to my door earlier that day. Bizarrely, when the police questioned him, he refused to say anything about his partner. He denied everything, even with the clear dents on my doors and the cracks in the window. Weeks went by, and he never explained why he was there or who the other man was. The whole thing remains a terrifying, unanswered question. Why were they so desperate to get in? What was the first man's role? I moved away a few months later, and to this day, I can't help but wonder, was it me they were after? And are they still out there? This next story's a bit different, but just as unsettling. It started with me trying to sell an old office chair on Craigslist. It was in great condition. I just didn't have space for it anymore. After a few days, I got a message from an interested buyer. We had a quick phone call, and he seemed perfectly normal and friendly. He even agreed to my asking price, so everything felt straightforward. For safety, I suggested we meet in a local Walmart parking lot, and he agreed. That Friday afternoon, I called him to let him know I was on my way. I got to the Walmart right on time. He'd told me he drove a gray Honda Civic, which I quickly realized was incredibly generic information. He knew what my car looked like, so I hoped he'd spot me and come over. But time ticked by. 10 minutes, 20, 30. No sign of him. Any send. A text, no reply. I called him a few minutes later, and it went straight to voicemail. I waited in that parking lot for almost an hour. As the sun started to set, I gave up and decided to head home, feeling annoyed that I'd wasted my entire afternoon. On the drive back, I was mostly just stewing in my frustration. But about halfway home, I got a prickling feeling on the back of my neck. I glanced in my rearview mirror and realized a car had been behind me for quite a while. It was probably nothing, but I couldn't shake the nervous feeling. Thankfully, as I turned onto my street, the car continued straight and disappeared. I breathed a sigh of relief. I pulled into my garage, went inside, and tossed my keys and phone on the counter. Then I went back out to get the chair out of my car. As I was walking down my driveway, a car pulled up and parked on the street, right in front of my house. I couldn't be certain, but it looked eerily similar to the one that had been following me. It was a dark red sedan, looked old, with rust spots dotting the body. My stomach dropped. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the chair, hurried back inside, and locked every single door, including the one to the garage. I immediately went to the front window and peeked through the blinds. The car was still there, just sitting in front of my house. The engine was still running. A minute passed, then 5, then 10. The car didn't move. The driver didn't get out. It just sat there, idling. A silent, menacing presence. I stayed by the window, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching and waiting for something, anything, to happen. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows, and still, the car remained. I didn't know who was in it or what they wanted, but one thing was clear. This was no random coincidence. The man from Craigslist hadn't been a no-show. He had shown up, just not in the way I expected. Thanks for listening, and remember to be safe out there. I'll see you in the next one. I checked my phone to see if the man had ever responded, and he still hadn't, and that's when it all really started making me nervous. After another minute, I heard a car door open and close. I looked out the window again and saw a figure in dark clothing standing beside the car, but he was facing the house. As if he was inspecting it once, I saw that I closed the blinds and dialed 911, explaining to the operator that a creepy man was outside my house and that I think he followed me home. They sent an officer on their way, and I thanked them, then hung up. I pushed the blind up slightly. Ellen checked out the window one more time. His car was still there, but the man was gone. I feel my heartbeat getting faster as I went around to each window and looked, but it wasn't. Until I got to my back door that I saw the man again. He was standing inside my fenced backyard and was looking up at my house. I didn't know what he was doing, but it was really creeping me out, and all I could think was that at any moment, he was going to try to break. And after a second, the man started walking to the side of my house. I went back to the front window to see if he was going back to his car, but he didn't reappear. Then I went around to every window again, trying to find him, but a few minutes later the police showed up. The car was still left outside my house, and the man was nowhere to be found. What's worse is that the car was completely empty, not having a single piece of paper or even a fingerprint anywhere inside or outside of it. It was apparently bought from a junkyard years ago, but that was the earliest record they had of it. The police were just as weirded out as I was, especially since the man just disappeared, leaving his car behind and showing no effort to break in. One thing we can say almost for certain is that it was likely the same man from Lisk who had used an untraceable email and account and followed me from the Walmart parking lot to my house. It's been a couple months since all of this, but I still worry, because why else would he have taken the time to inspect my house on all sides if he wasn't planning on coming back any day now to finish whatever it was he came to do when I was 21. I made the poor decision to move out of my parents' house before I could afford a place on my own. It was something I'd actually planned out for months, searching for cheap apartments, roommates, and anything that could help me move out. For some reason, I just prioritized moving out on my own over everything else. After months of searching, I found a post on Facebook about a room for rent in my area. It was a 2-bedroom house, and the owner was renting out the 2nd bedroom. I sent him a message on Facebook and got a reply in minutes. He asked a couple of questions, then sent over a document. It looked like a huge list of rules for moving and all simple stuff. That's pretty much common sense. After agreeing to all the rules, he let me come over to look at the room. That same day when I got there, I was very surprised at how clean and well put together the place was. It looked like it was a model house, so perfectly decorated and furnished. The owner, Terry, was a little bit weird though. He was in his late 20s, but his personality and looks didn't match the way the house looked. He was wearing a dirty t-shirt and hoosed, had a weird way of talking still. I was blinded by the possibility of moving out. But I didn't even care. A week later, I packed up a rental van with my stuff and drove it down to the house. When I walked inside, I almost thought I'd walked into the wrong house. It was so empty, no decorations or furniture except for an old couch in the living room. It was a completely different looking place than the one I'd seen the first time. Terry was standing there and acted like nothing was different, talking my ear off about how excited he was to have a roommate. I asked about all the furniture and everything, but he basically ignored my question and just went straight to moving. My stuffed into the house being a little weirded out, I still moved, and several weeks went by, and to be honest, I rarely even saw Terry. He was always working and didn't get home until late at night. But about a month in, I started realizing that Terry had stopped coming home most nights. It was maybe once a week. I'd hear him get home around 2 or 3 a.m. He'd hang around downstairs for a while, then leave, and wouldn't show up for another week or so. Part of me didn't care because I was happy to have the house to myself, but another part of me was curious about what he was up to. I mean, he wanted me to move in so bad, but now he's never here. Then one night at 2 a.m., weeks since I'd last seen Terry. I was woken up to him banging on my bedroom door and yelling my name. I got up and rushed over. Terry was standing in the doorway with sweat dripping from his head and a look of anger. "Do not leave your room," he said in a harsh voice, then grabbed the door and ripped the handle out of my hand, slamming it shut. I stood there in shock. Listening to him walk downstairs, I opened the door quietly, and after a few seconds I heard the sound of him dragging something heavy across the floor and into the garage. I ran downstairs to see what was going on. There was a smear of mud and dirt going across the kitchen and leading up to the garage door. I tried to open it, but he somehow locked it from inside. I realized it was best to just remove myself from the situation and ran out to my car, driving away while calling the cops. When they got to the house, Terry was already gone, and the smears on the floor had been cleaned up after some days of investigating. It turned out that Terry was actually renting the house from someone else, so I wasn't even allowed to have legally moved in, and all the documents he sent me and had me sign were fake. Terry likely wasn't his real name either, and as far as I know, he never showed back up after that. I don't know for sure what he was up to, but he was so adamant about me staying in my room that night, and with him vanishing afterward, he clearly had something horrible he was hiding. But what really confuses me is why he wanted me to move into the house and live with him so badly. I can't help but think that he had some sort of plans for me, and I barely got out of there without having to find out the hard way. 3 years ago, I moved down a few states on the East Coast to a new city due to work of money. I couldn't make the trip to see the place before making the move, but I was only renting, so there wasn't too much risk in it. It was mid-September when the movers came and loaded everything up, then dropped it off at the house. The landlord was nice enough to let the movers in for me to unload, because I wasn't actually arriving there until the following week. It was a Monday evening when I finally arrived and saw the house in person for the first time. It was a mess, with boxers everywhere and furniture laying all around. But the house itself was all right. The layout was interesting in that it was very separated. It was a single story with the kitchen and living room on one side of the house. Then on the other side was a long hallway with all the bedrooms and bathrooms, since it was already late. I went to the master bedroom and started working on getting the bed put together, then shut off all the lights and went to sleep. I didn't have a clock set up yet, so I don't know what time it was, but in the middle of the night I woke up to an odd sound. I thought it was a noise the house was making, but I wanted to see what it was, and if it was something I needed to let the landlord know about. I got up and walked over to the room door. As I got closer, though I realized it was coming from somewhere down the hallway, I opened the door and it stopped almost instantly. The hallway was pitch black, so I flicked on the light, but nothing was there. I slowly walked down and peered into the living room. It looked the same as it had earlier, but I turned on the lights and looked around. Just to be sure, on the floor there were a lot of footprints scattered between the boxers that were laying around. I knew it was likely from the movers, and with no other signs of anything, I went back to the bedroom. It took a while for me to fall asleep again because I kept thinking about how the sound stopped as soon as I opened the door. I tried to come up with any possible way this could be the house making noises, but nothing came to mind. When I drifted back asleep, it felt like I only stayed asleep for a minute before I was woken up by a sudden thump, followed by footsteps running down the hallway. My eyes shot open and I looked over at my bedroom door. The door was wide open, and on the ground were clear footprints. Coming right up to my bed, I got up and hurried to see who was there, but by then they were long gone. All that was left were scuffed prints from them running away. I got my phone and called the police, locking myself in the bathroom until they arrived. When they did, they oddly found no signs of a break-in aside. From the footprints, I convinced myself that they must have gained access during the week before I arrived at the house, but something still didn't sit right with me. After unpacking and checking each box, nothing seemed to be missing. It obviously makes me wonder what they were even doing in the house, but the biggest mystery is why did they walk up to my bed, and what was that thump sound that I heard just before they ran away? The landlord was eager to allow me to break the contract and move out, so long as I didn't say anything about the break-in publicly at the time. It sounded like he just didn't want anyone to be scared away from the house so that he wouldn't miss out on his rental income. But now, I'm not so sure. This happened a couple years back when I was 26. My single mother had just passed away, and being the only child, their house was left for me to either sell or move into. I was living in a really nasty apartment because I couldn't afford much back. Then, and after much deliberation, I decided to move into the house. It was already paid off, so I was saving a considerable amount of money by moving in. My goal was to hopefully save up for a few years and get back on my feet, then sell it and buy the house that I wanted. Once my lease was up at the apartment, I moved across town to the house. It was part of a community of farmland owners, but in the recent years, most of that land had stopped being used for farming and was left as just empty fields. That's what happened with my mom's land as well. It was pretty much just an old barn-style home in the middle of a huge field, with only a small overgrown path leading to it in the first week. Living there, I spent most of my time cleaning and getting all of my stuff where I wanted it. During one of these nights while I was cleaning, I heard a car coming toward the house. I looked out the window and saw an old pickup truck driving down the overgrown path. It was very strange, being that the only reason for them driving here would be if they were coming to the house. But just as they approached the end of the path, they slowed to a stop. I could make out a male figure in the driver's seat, but couldn't make out any specifics. They stayed there for a moment, with their headlights shining over the field before they did a 3-point turn and drove away. I thought they'd probably just typed in the wrong address or something, but it was kind of creepy to see someone coming all the way out here. So late in the night, a few days went by, and by then I'd finished getting the house cleaned up and organized. It was a Sunday night, and I was staying up late, watching TV and eating a home-cooked meal when a familiar sound came up in the distance, a car driving toward the house. I looked out the window again and saw that same pickup truck coming down the path, this time with all its headlights off. Knowing it couldn't possibly be an accident this time, I was more worried. I quickly looked at my phone and saw it was nearly 1 a.m. So why would anyone be coming near the truck? Came all the way to the front of the house and parked. Then a man got out and started walking up to the porch. I waited anxiously, but after a minute there was no doorbell or knocking. I cautiously went up to the front door and looked out the peephole. A man was standing right on the porch, looking directly at the door. I was terrified as he looked like he was contemplating something. Then he turned around and went back to his truck, getting in and hurrying away. I was really creeped out, so I called the police and reported it, but there was nothing else to be done. I went to bed that night with a really bad feeling about everything, apparently. I was right, because I woke up to what I thought was the sound of a knock at the door. It was just a single knock. I got up right away and looked out the window, but the truck that I thought I'd see wasn't anywhere outside the house. I quietly left my bedroom to try and go downstairs and see who it was, but just as I reached the top of the steps, I could see that the front door was slightly open. I froze, and moments later I heard footsteps walking through the hallway below me. I quickly hid in the spare bedroom that was next to me and dialed 911 as the footsteps grew louder and started coming up the stairs. They went straight into the main bedroom, and I could hear them moving stuff around like they were looking for something. I was too scared to speak to the officer on the phone, worried the intruder would hear me, so I just sat there silently. I spent a few minutes going through the bedroom before leaving and going back downstairs and finally visiting the house. I started talking to the officer as I ran up to the back window to see if I could identify them before they got away. It was dark, but I could see that it was the same man who was on my porch earlier. He was walking in the backyard toward the field of tall grass, eventually disappearing in it. Police came by and tried to find any evidence to help with the case, but my description of the man was about all there was that was helpful. I don't know what that man wanted, but he seemed to be looking for something specific. It makes me think maybe he knew of something my mother had enough to hearing of her passing. He wanted to steal it, but once I realized he had to have known I was home, and probably in the bedroom, it terrified me to think about how he still went in and looked around. What was he planning to do to me if I was still in there? I ended up selling the house a month later because I was too scared of him coming back. Even now, I still check every few months to see if there were any reports of recent break-ins at that address. But it's been quiet ever since that night.